let's rise the curtain. So welcome everybody. As you're tuning in, we'd love to just welcome you to today's conversation. I am Danielle Duplin, co-founder of Agency. Agency is a hub for collective impact where innovators are improving the aging journey. We work closely with entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, academics, government officials, policymakers, essentially everyone in, all stakeholders in the ecosystem that are helping the world's populations to live longer and age better. And we're very excited to be part of this iconic event with the Venture Cafe Global happening, with events that are ranging from, I guess it was like 5 o'clock in the morning all the way for the next 12 hours to really invite the global community into a conversation about creating the better new normal. And one thing that clearly, regardless of where you live, city, rural, United States, Europe, anywhere in this world, we are all facing two things at the same time. Clearly, what it's like to live through this pandemic and to get through it safely and with compassion and with our health. And today's conversation, we're also experiencing what it's like to feel older and to have fewer choices around how you get to age and where you get to be and what it's like to feel isolated from the people you love or access to the healthcare that you need. Clearly, the last couple of months have created what I like to think of as a global empathy moment for the world's aging populations. And so we are really excited in that bringing the community together to talk about promising ideas and how do we make everyone's day just go a little bit better. And it's important that we have this conversation across cultures because we all share, this is something that we all have in common, is how do we age with choice and with dignity. And so for today, we are also super excited, in addition to being on the Venture Cafe Global platform, to have this conversation with my fabulous guest speaker, Betsy Bluestone, the commercial discovery leader for Procter Gamble Ventures. So I would love to introduce Betsy. Betsy, say hello. I got to find you on my Zoom here. Hi.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are.
So, Betsy, this is our second event in a series of 3 that we're kicking off a global call to action where Procter Gamble, which is a beloved global brand leader of many products that are household names and iconic brands that we all trust. And now P&G are setting their sights of how do they grow old with us too. So we'll engage in a conversation. Betsy and I will talk about what she's looking for innovative startups. And we'll get into what it means to work with P&G, how to partner with a global brand. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the details, like how do we get down to the ground truth of what the unmet needs are, to hopefully spark some great ideas with all of you who are tuning in. So welcome to everybody who's on the call. Let's get to it. So Betsy, let's start with, tell us about Procter & Gamble, how P&G as a company are looking towards the future.
Excellent. So it's probably helpful to have a little bit of a backdrop to know that within each one of our business units, we have a focus on upstream innovation. So what are the trends, what's happening in the marketplace? How do we make sure that we are always on top of what the consumer needs and kind of moving in that direction? So that's a critical piece of every one of our business units. What's a little bit different in ventures is that we're focused on building businesses and categories where P&G doesn't already compete. So, for sure, everyone is focused on the aging consumer as it is, whether that's our hair care business or our laundry business. It's a universal priority for the company. But within ventures, we've been really focusing on understanding kind of what's emerging. And I guess probably
Mm.
no better time to have this conversation as we're all acutely aware of what it is that we need to do those activities of daily living in our homes when you don't have a lot of access. And so our focus right now is sort of continued focus on what's happening in the aging space, but also what does this particular time in the world inform in terms of where we go from here.
Beautiful. So, so help us understand this redefining aging at home. What was the strategic mindset that helped you craft that? What is it that you're looking for? You know, how do you, yeah.
Yeah, so when you look at this space, and as we started to really do an exploratory, what you find is that about 95% of people who we are trying to serve are actually living at home, but the bulk of the innovation that is happening in this space is really more institutionally focused. And not that work doesn't need to be done, but your design criteria is very different when you're looking to solve problems in an institutional environment than when you're looking to serve the consumer at home. And as you think about cost optimization and things like that are sort of typical components of trying to serve an institutional environment, sometimes you don't have that focus on kind of both caregiver and the person in the home and how it is that they need to do those activities and what are the things that enable them to stay home. So as we have focused on what are the areas that P&G Ventures is uniquely looking at in the active aging space, we've really tried to pick apart what are the things that come unraveled, what are the events that happen that prevent us from being able to age, to have the choice to age where we want to age. And so that has very much informed what the areas or pain points that we're looking at today.
Okay, so we'll dig into each of those pain points in a moment. What I'd love to do first, though, is talk a little bit about your process. So you're the commercial discovery leader. You're out there scanning the globe. In the before times, you have been hopping on
Yes.
planes and going around, right?
I wouldn't have been in this office.
Right, exactly. So, so what are you looking for? What's a qualified lead? At what stage is an idea interesting to you? So help us understand what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're pretty agnostic to stage. It's not our number one criteria. Our process really starts with understanding who will be consuming and how they will consume. We do deep dives into, what are the jobs that need to be done to solve a particular pain point. So we as a company are just laser focused on the consumer and making sure that we are solving the problem at hand. And so it starts with understanding really what's the technical challenge? Why has a particular problem not been solved to the consumer satisfaction? So that's kind of where we start. And that deep understanding then takes us to looking for technologies that fit our business model. So we're a fast-moving consumables company. That doesn't mean that digital solutions might not be interesting or relevant, or you might not have a device or something else that solves the problem. But our core business, of course, is fast-moving consumables. So that's the take that we have on it. And then there are other criteria. We're not in the prescription business, so we're looking at kind of things that you can buy every day in local stores and online. And probably the most important component of that is really delivering something that has consumer noticeable superiority. So when we go out and look for technology and we're assessing the strength of that technology, the first question is there a consumer wow? Is something happening here where the consumer is saying, yeah, this actually solves the problem better than anything I've ever tried before? And those are the places where we're really interested.
So I want to dig into that a little bit. So I love this phrase that you have, this notion that the products or solutions need to be novel and superior, right? I love that it sets that bar. So if for the entrepreneurs who are on the call right now, and for those who wish to collaborate with you, what is the proof point that they need to show up with and how much data, how many pilot tests, like help us understand when it crosses a threshold of interestingness for you.
Yeah.
Because some of those, to try to get some of that data and some of those pilots, those are expensive journeys. So how much feedback do you need before you'll actually start to engage?
You know, we're pretty flexible. Obviously, the further along you are in the journey of proving that something has real proven efficacy, the easier it is for us to envision a business, right? And so
Okay.
that's, I guess human nature. But I'd back up to say, I think we're looking for evidence. And when I talked about understanding the technical challenge, sort of why do we lose our mobility? Why do we lose our balance? What are the things that are happening in our bodies that cause that, to happen? When you start to kind of get to that level of understanding, there are mechanisms that simply make sense for how you solve something. So oftentimes that's all we start with. That's all we start with is, what? Kitchen logic, this makes sense. The science makes sense that this could be a solution. And sometimes the entrepreneur or inventor is further along in being able to prove that out. And sometimes we do that together.
And you have vast resources of scientists and labs and so forth to help the entrepreneur on some of that, right? So it would be okay if they had early proof, maybe maybe a focus group or some feedback, and now we want to take it into more scientific rigor. That's something that P&G could help with.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people who partner with us do so. Certainly there are areas where it is difficult to come by money. So I don't want to overgeneralize, but usually money is not much of a differentiator. What is the differentiator for partnering with Procter Gamble Ventures is the just unbelievable resources, whether your challenges in brand building or understanding the consumer or in logistics or supply chain, manufacturing, distribution, whatever it is that you're trying, regulatory, whatever it is that you are trying to get done. Generally, people are attracted to partnering with P&G not only because of the potential to make a really huge brand and a huge impact on society, but also because the resources that we are able to unleash onto to whatever it is you need to accelerate your business.
So, and I love too that you have the depth of resources and the breadth, the reach, the geographic reach, right? So P&G is a global brand. So talk us through, again, as you go out there and scout, how do you look at what's working in different parts of the world or different cultures or contexts? And how do you then figure out how that may or may not work in different settings, with different insurance landscapes or different family landscapes or healthcare system landscapes? So how do you then go through that part of your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about working with a global company and for a global company is that those resources exist in every market. And so whenever we're looking to expand into a new market, we have experts on the ground who can help us with regulatory or distribution or whatever it is that is the key sort of next step. Again, pretty agnostic in terms of where the technology comes from. So all of our scouting effort is global. In fact, yesterday I was on the phone with somebody from Denmark. This morning with somebody from Israel. So we are, we are scouring the planet to find the best technologies. And because our model is startup studio, but it's decentralized. You don't have to be in our offices in Cincinnati to take advantage of those resources. So wherever you are in the world, our team is able to work with you and help accelerate the business and then understand if it's really got potential for P&G.
Love it. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. So we now have about 75 people tuning in. So welcome to everybody who's come in the last couple of minutes. We're talking with Betsy Bluestone, Commercial Discovery Leader for Procter Gamble Ventures. And by all means, load up the chat with your questions. So we'd love to hear thoughts, anything that's lighting up for you, questions that you'd like us to weave into the conversation, because this session is really for all of you and your innovation journey. We want to help to amplify the great work that you're doing. So Betsy, I love that while we're sitting here talking about big businesses and category defining solutions, P&G Venture Studio really takes an entrepreneur-centric model. So tell us more about what that means. How does it feel like as an entrepreneur is working with you? What can they expect?
Yeah, I mean, our early conversation, so, we use this dating metaphor because I think it just works so brilliantly in this context. And so when we find new technology or we find a business that we're really interested in, we start, kind of from the beginning in understanding what is the entrepreneur or inventor's journey, where are they in the development of their business, and what do they need? And so this works when we bring together the best of the startup with the best of the big company. That's where the magic hits, and that's why we're so focused on external technology. Is there's so much to be gained by bringing the outside in to these businesses and to these problems that we're trying to solve. And so what I think works really well is when we fully understand where the entrepreneur or inventor is in their journey, what it is that they need, and they understand what we're looking for. So what are the things that we're trying to prove out? Do we have that proof of efficacy that we're looking for, or that proof of superiority that we need? And if not yet, how do we get to that in a way that accelerates the business for the entrepreneur and accelerates our understanding of whether this is a business that we want to be in?
Nice. So Karen actually would then like to know, do you also work with academic partners?
We sure do.
Okay, good,
Yes,
good. Yeah,
sure
talk more
do.
about that. Because I imagine somebody who's like doing some PhD research, right? And digging into, as you say, the physiology changes in our bodies as we age, and getting to some of those seminal technical issues, but maybe not necessarily sees themselves as a full-up entrepreneur co-founding a business, but wants to participate in that process. How do you incorporate that?
Which is, I mean, you can't think of a better partnership there, right? When you've got somebody who's got the science, is focused on the data, likely is doing the work that gives you not only the understanding of the technical challenge, but also an understanding of kind of what the science can do to solve it. And then you marry that with a company that's really good at brand building and scaling businesses. It's a pretty good marriage. So we do a lot of work with universities and federal labs and all kinds of different organizations who are focused on the science. And then that really allows us to come in and bring some of the stuff that P&G can uniquely add to the mix.
Love it. Great. So I think now would be a good time then to dig into the actual focus areas around aging, because I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in around, what is the impact on social determinants of health, like loneliness and so forth. So if somebody has an idea that maybe a little further upstream to your target area, but has this downstream impact, like, is that interesting to you? So we're all trying to kind of go after this from the whole human perspective, right?
Yeah.
So, but let's dig in to the categories, right? So P&G is really interested in de-risking showering. What's going on there? What's interesting for you?
Yeah. So, I think if you think about all of the spaces that we're going to talk about, and for those of you that joined the call a little bit late, I was talking about this idea that is, kind of what are the things that limit our choices on where we get to live, right? And so, as we age and you think about what are the events, the things that happen to us physically and mentally that cause us to not be able to stay in our homes, if that's what we want to do. And so what we've done within Ventures is really understand what are those 5 or 6 triggers that most often cause somebody to have to change their living arrangement, and then understand what are the technical challenges to solving those problems. And so as we think about things like de-risking showering, you get to this understanding that falls are one of the key reasons why people aren't able to age in place. Not being able to care for yourself and do those activities of daily living, being able to take a shower and care for yourself. Those are some of the things that that cause us to not be able to stay in place. So de-risking showering is so fascinating, because you would think, if you didn't know a lot about the subject, you would think that most of the falls are happening when people are getting into the shower or getting out of the shower. And what you learn is that there's this whole confluence of things that are happening that have to do with me bending over to pick things up, twisting my body, the fog in the shower combined with not great vision. Right? These are all of the things that are impacting the safety of being able to bathe oneself. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at to try and understand, how do we de-risk that? How do we enable you to take care of yourself, or even with a caregiver to be able to help you so that you can stay where you want to stay or age where you want to stay.
Well, and I don't want to talk about that trigger, because one of the next topics is managing incontinence. And we work with a founder who's working on female incontinence solutions. And I think his data show that about 12 to 15 incidents, if you will, between a mom and her daughter who's taking care of her, about 12 to 15 incidents, and that triggers the intent to move to a nursing facility or outside the home care. So it's fascinating. Somebody's asking about data and analytics, like to understand like the triggers that then unfortunately might create like this cascading set of decisions but if you just solved that one problem, you wouldn't have to then bump into this new set of living arrangements. So I'd love to talk more about some of those triggers, because those are insights for where an innovator can solve. Right?
I think that this space is filled with tensions, and there are tensions that we have within ourselves as we're aging, with the people that we live with, the people that are trying to care for us. And I do think that there are sort of tripping points, right, where you kind of go from everything was going fine, and then you leave the stove on, or you know what I mean. Like there are those things that happen that kind of trigger you into the needing a different solution, or those that care for you feeling like you need a different solution. And so in the incontinence area, this is such a complex problem. Dehydration is a massive problem. A huge cost.
I'm going to hydrate while we're talking.
Yes. A huge cost of healthcare, a huge problem in terms of the number of hospitalizations that happen because of dehydration. What are the reasons? There are 10 of them that are why hydration becomes such a problem as we age. Not the least of which is, if you are incontinent, you want to drink less, so that you don't have those problems. And so we've really, as we've been looking at this, trying to solve the problem in a way that is dignified. And yes, there are adult diapers and things like that, and I know that those are important businesses in a lot of different contexts. They're important for people, but there's this whole insight that is about, how do you give people more time, right? So when you feel like you have the urge to go to the bathroom, and you wake up in the middle of the night, how do you give yourself some time to kind of get your grounding, before you jump out of bed and you're disoriented and you slip and fall, or you have an accident, which then makes you fall, right? So these are all of these things that have kind of knock-on effects. So incontinence is a hugely important one, for incontinence in and of itself, but also as it ties to dehydration and the causes and the problems that cause. So we're very, very interested in this space, and how do you find dignified solutions that give people more time, allow them to take care of themselves, and not trigger that event, which is a caregiver saying, I can't take care of you anymore.
Right. Well, and I think too, hydration is also tied to your other major category, which is skin health, right? So, I mean, it's the biggest organ in our bodies, and we, need to take care of it, both internally, what we eat and hydrate, and what we, externally and so forth. So, What is your science telling you? What are you seeing? What are the pain points, the unmet needs in terms of skin health?
So skin health is so interesting, and of course we are a skincare business. We own multiple skin businesses, Olay and SK2 and First Aid Beauty and Snowberry and
Olay was this is a product placement, but Olay was my very first skin cream when I was 16 and buying my first. So thank you for that. But yes, keep going.
Been with me for my whole life too. And so, we have deep skin knowledge within Ventures. We stood up a brand a couple of years ago that is an eczema and psoriasis business. So really deep understanding of the skin. And what I think is interesting as you think about aging skin is that there are a whole bunch of jobs to be done in and around that space. As you think about fragile skin and bruising, you think about pressure ulcers, you think about complications due to diabetes, right? There's a whole bunch of really interesting stuff there, and I think kind of at the heart of that is how do you solve the problem, which is helping to heal the wound faster. And so, as you know, right, with tears in the skin and things like that, what happens is the consumer or the person has this kind of cascade of problems that happen with infection and lack of mobility and all of these things. And so we're really interested in this space. I have personal passion for this one. My mother is 82 and has tissue paper thin skin, and every time she bumps it, it starts with you have the tear, and then it's all of the care to take care of it. You can't stitch things up because the skin isn't strong enough. Then you have infection and scarring and all of these other things. It causes problems with bathing. So again, all of these things are so interconnected. But I think a really high potential space if we can start to figure out how do you accelerate healing so that that people don't have, again, all of those knock-on effects.
Well, and then I'm glad you mentioned diabetes, because then the chronic health conditions are also now impacting or maybe accelerating the need for some of these things. I mean, even for lots of folks who are on blood thinners, right? Then their skin is going to start to get thinner maybe sooner than their genetics would have said, So like there's a market for these products for sure. And what I love is how you were breaking it down into the finer components, because again, each one of those could be an entry point for an entrepreneur to make a difference, right? So if it's on the wound dressing part of it, if it's on the healing faster, if it's on the preventing the infection, if it's just maintaining the vibrancy of the skin to begin with, the preventative side of things. So I guess then P&G would be interested in the full range, right? That
and give me signs of progress. I'm taking care of my skin. Is it getting better or is it not getting better? Do I want to keep using this product or do I not want to keep using this product? Is my wound healing? Is it, am I actually making progress? Might it be infected, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff on sort of diagnostics, but, in the realm of trying to help you understand if you are making progress.
So that's awesome. So I want to keep talking about that, because what we're seeing at agency, a lot of startups will have a, solve the problem idea, and then there's this maybe app around it, and there's data collection, and there's dashboard, or there's, something that is feedback loop to your use of that product. So you said, okay, P&G is looking for CPG. We get that, right? We want to buy it off the shelf. And what about the digital components? Tell us more about what's interesting to you in terms of those feedback loops.
Yeah, no question. That is all part of creating a holistic proposition against any one of these pain points. I mean, pretty much anything that you can imagine. I mentioned the work that we've done in eczema and psoriasis. That's a lifelong thing that most people who have it need to deal with. And as you think about, kind of giving people that feedback loop, again, am I making progress? Is this getting better? And I think that's such an important component. Now, we usually start with the heart, which is that solution. Do I have a solution that actually solves the problem better than that problem has ever been solved before? So that's kind of where we start. But then as you think about building out the proposition, there's a massive need to make sure that we've got that we're closing the loop.
Got it. Yes. So, and I think that ties back to what you're saying, that maybe the de-risk showering and the falling is less about the shower for a particular individual and more about their mobility, right? They're just overall physical health. So a question came in from one of our agency founders, Jennifer Brine, on what about solutions just to help with overall strengthening and mobility mechanics and so forth? Like, is that interesting to P&G?
Yeah, so mobility is a really interesting, pain point. And as we think about all of the different things that are impacted by lack of mobility and fall prevention related to lack of mobility and balance and all of that. So we're not, so many of the solutions are more of a durable or an app-based solution. Tell me, on my phone when I'm losing my balance. And I think that's interesting. And I think there's a ton of opportunity there. We're a little bit more focused on sort of the mechanics, interesting, like fascinating things that happen with our feet as we age, and having less sensitivity in our feet. Having less sensitivity in our feet makes us not as aware when we're losing our balance. So how do you think about that? How do you put people more in touch with the ground that they're standing on and realize if they're in, if they're balanced or they're not? What are those signals that you can give them? So I think there's some really interesting partial solutions maybe that kind of get you to the building blocks of what could create a really meaningful brand for people on the area of mobility. So, we're certainly interested in strengthening. We've talked a lot about PT, for example, and what are the limitations of physical therapy. I mean, think about the last 5 months. If you were a person who needed physical therapy, and you were 80, what would you do? And how would you work that out? And so we think that there's some great opportunities in how do you help people to strengthen themselves so that they have better balance and better mobility. So there's no shortage of pain points in that particular space.
Well, and I love this theme that you keep reiterating, which is go beyond the obvious. Right. So for fall prevention, indeed, we need solutions that detect when people fall, and, so we can safely go get, help them right in the moment. But let's get in what happened just before the fall, and then what happened just before you fell. Right. And so what was the signal that was maybe the signal to noise ratio weeks before you didn't hear it, but now if there's a product that can help you detect it. And I think too, the second theme that I'm hearing too is around the self-awareness. Right. And then not having shame, really, quite frankly, about the changes in our bodies. Right. So if you realize that your skin is getting drier and you can't touch the touch pad anymore because it doesn't react to drier skin, just say, all right, I got to solve for hydration. Now, it's like raising awareness, okay, the insensitivity in your feet. I would never have thought about that. So how do you then have this conversation through your product design with consumers that makes these products desirable, right? And that removes the stigma or the messaging that you're old. Like, nobody wants to be told that we're old.
Yeah, I think that, kind of as you think about, how do you, problem solution is the easiest way to approach any pain point. But when you're talking to consumers, I think it's so important that we are framing around possibilities and potential and not framing around limitations. And so, nobody wants to hear, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's all about being able to keep doing the things that you love, and how do we enable that? And you talk to people, we talked about de-risking showering, and you talk to people about, like, what does being able to shower on your own mean to you? People like to have buddies in their life, but people are not so keen to have a buddy in the bathroom. Like, that's not,
right.
that's generally not people's favorite place to have a friend.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, the dignity of being able to care for one's self and bathe oneself and all of that sort of self-care that happens in the bathroom, all of that is about possibility, and how do you enable people to continue to do things that make them feel good, make them feel like themselves. And so our angle is very focused on possibilities, not limitations.
I love that. And then how do you engage with consumers? So when a startup or an innovator comes to you and say, okay, here's my proof point, is one of the criteria that they've actually designed with their intended audience or the intended customer, instead of designing for? This is a great question that came from, I'm sorry, I'm looking over there, from Leanne, to everyone, but she works with the North Carolina State College of Design to bridge the gap. So they focus a lot on design thinking and customer-centric design. So
yeah.
Yeah.
This has been such a fascinating journey about where we find technology and solutions. And, in the beginning, when we would brief and we would say, okay, we're interested in this particular space, and we're going to go out and we're going to scout for solutions in a particular area. And we were maybe just, a little, had blinders on as to where a solution could come from. And then we started to discover, in no space is this more relevant than in the aging space, that is kind of jumping into different sectors for inspiration and for solutions has been so effective. So when you think about mobility or hydration, so let's just take those two, and you are laser focused on what does that mean for an aging consumer, and you're looking at it, in a very tunnel vision kind of way, you miss the fact that there is all of this stuff happening with athletes, right? Both on how do they retain their mobility, how do they recover faster, how are they measuring their hydration, how are they making sure that they are at their peak performance. All of these things translate no matter what your age is. And so I think what's very helpful about, one, understanding what the technical challenges really are, and so that opens up how you think about how you solve the problem. But as I said early on into this, I think you said Leanne's question is about design. This is a design problem. So much of this is a design problem. How do you take that solution that maybe you found in the world of athletics and translate that into something that works beautifully for a consumer who's 65?
Right. So considering the dexterity limitations, or considering, just strength or right. So, so then I'm thinking, what are some of the examples of companies that you're working with right now that are in your portfolio? And I don't want you to give away any trade secrets, obviously, but what are some examples of a sector switch company that you're working with?
Hydration's a great one. So we kind of went down a path of trying to solve it one way and then found ourselves into another, but really inspired by understanding athletes and dehydration, and as you think about what are the challenges in measuring your hydration level and thinking that through, and not everybody wants to test their urine or things like that, and testing sweat is really challenging when you're not maybe super mobile or super active. And so kind of thinking about how do you solve that problem and how do you measure was really interesting and informed a lot by what we saw from an athletic perspective. So I think then again, how do you translate that if the consumer isn't sweating, how else might you get measurement? And so there's lots of cool things that we are seeing, and we're also seeing like brilliant pivots during this time in the pandemic, as people are looking at technologies that they had started with and saying, you know what, what's happening in the world informs a different way of thinking about the problem, or informs a different way of thinking about my solution.
Right.
So there's a lot of activity that's happening with the partners that we have that is evolving or pivoting or whatever you want to say because of the world we're living in today.
So then let's talk a little bit about channel, right? So we've been talking a lot about self-care, right? So these presumably would be products that folks would purchase for themselves. As we know, a lot of people have in-home family caregivers that are, you know, helping them with some of these things, or there's professional caregivers that come to the house. So how does P&G think about the extended user, concentric circles of users, right? And that does it cross over into you know, products that particularly the physician needs to know about or would be recommending. And I know you said you don't get into the prescription side of things, but I'm just curious, like maybe this is something that would be appropriate for a caregiver to be administrating, or how does that change the design thinking?
Yeah, we definitely think about both. Now, you know, we're motivated by trying to keep the consumer independent. And so, you know, I'd say that's sort of your design criteria number one, is how do we enable you to care for yourself? But, you know, there are some brilliant examples. Our Gillette business launched a razor called Trio over the last couple of years that is designed to shave someone else, right? So when you think about dignities and things that just make people feel like themselves, for many men, having a clean shaven face is really an important part of feeling like yourself, and that becomes difficult when your hands aren't as steady or your vision isn't as good and things like that. And so there certainly are places, both within Ventures as well as more broadly within P&G, where we're thinking about how do you solve the problem from the caregiver's perspective. So in you know, the ideal scenario, you've got both. It can work for you to care for yourself, or for a caregiver to care for you. But there are some brilliant ones like this Trio example within P&G that really brings to light that idea that these are dignities that people deserve to have, and that we can help as caregivers, we can help to give them.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I love well, that's why we called our organization agency, right? Because it's all about a little triple play on the words there, but it's all about how do you have that sense of choice, right? And so that's essential, really. So I'd love to then just talk a little bit about how you partner with companies. So now they've come to you with a great idea. You get excited. It's novel, it's superior. It checks a lot of the boxes. What are the different structures that you then engage with companies? Do you take equity? Do you have board? Like, what's the different ways that you partner with companies?
We actually generally don't take equity. Most of what we do in the early stages are learning together. So, you know, what are your priorities? What are our priorities? How do we, you know, sort of bring the best of them together? You know, ultimately, as you think about the end game, we're pretty open to where that goes, and a lot of that is informed by the entrepreneur or the inventor themselves and what it is that they want out of this creation that they've got. So sometimes it's a joint venture, sometimes it's, you know, it's an acquisition, sometimes it's a licensing agreement. So, you know, there's all different ways that we work together. We find, you know, lots of the things that we find on university, coming out of university research, for example. What's really interesting to that group of inventors is a licensing agreement. Sometimes when you've got a couple of people who have, you know, gotten together in their basement and built a business, they may actually have a vision of running that business for a long time, and so, you know, perhaps, you know, jointly developing that business is the best solution for both of us. So
great.
It really depends. You know, ultimately our objective is that we scale businesses globally and they become, kind of part of the mothership of P&G, right? That's the end game. But there's a lot of steps in between that get you from an idea or an MVP to something that is, 50 to 100 million to $1 billion in sales. And so that's really, as we kind of think about what takes us from here to there, there's, kind of all different iterations that can work.
Right. Love it. So, and I love the flexibility with that, because as we say, I mean, there's millions of ways to solve all of these things that we've been talking about, and the same solutions are not going to work for everybody. So there might be variations and iterations and so forth. And for the same person, the same buyer, they themselves might have, changed their requirements along the way. And so I think, and I love this notion that you're building this lifetime relationship with your consumers. And it kind of goes to Anis. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, has this question for everybody. At what age do we start aging? Right? So we've been focusing on aging, and the research showed that lots of people say, well, it's 20 years older than me, whatever
Right.
you are at the time. So I'd love to just open that up actually in the chat. Wasn't everybody go ahead and put in what you think? I'd love to hear. But for P&G standpoint, when you think about market segments, we've been talking a lot about like these functional limitations. And so at agency, we often say, well, it's not really a number, right? Oh, somebody says as soon as you're born, right? It's true. That like in England, right? It's like you start aging the minute you're born. They take care, that's
right.
all the preventative, right, along the way can help you have better outcomes. But from a market segment standpoint, like where's P&G focused in this space? So is it on the prevention side? Are you targeting, on the memory care side? Where are you?
Yeah. I think as a corporation, it starts with Pampers, right, and then goes through the whole life stage. So one could argue we're a cradle to grave company, and I think that's good, right? Because you when you have trusted brands and you can be with people through whatever it is that they need in whatever stage of life. And I think one of the, I think back 10 years ago, and as we would do our consumer targeting, as we were developing brands or selling brands, miraculously at 50 or 55, the consumer no longer existed. And there's really been a huge shift, not just at Procter, but broadly, in talking about how do you market to a 50 plus, a 60 plus, a 70 plus consumer. So the marketing thing, I think, has shifted dramatically over the last call it decade or so. From a ventures perspective, our active aging, is probably, starts at 55 or 60. But the conversation we were just having about skincare and, sort of that, what are the things that you need to do to fortify and take care of the skin barrier so that, your skin, doesn't become fragile and tissue paper like, and, one could certainly argue that you need to start a lot earlier than 55 or 60 if you want to get ahead of that. So I think that some of these businesses really have, quite wide ranges. Maybe your design target is a consumer who's 55 or 60 plus, but there is certainly application. And if you're marketing it properly, then that's actually that can be an aspirational brand for somebody who's 45 or 50.
Yes. Well, we were talking about oil of Olay, so that attracted me as a 16-year-old, and now I see it's it's really interesting going to and seeing the evolution of the different products for the different age segments, but none of which looks like there's stigma attached. I mean, it looks like, oh, I can't wait to like get to the when I get the black box with the gold and the like, so it's,
right. There's some good stuff.
There's some good stuff out there. So. And I think that's, now there's a lot of great feedback in the chat about this notion of ageism and being ageist in our product design and even the language that we're using around these products. And so, and that's really, again, that's the whole that's like our whole motivation for agency, is that we see innovation equal optimism, and also in aggregate, just changing the narrative about growing older, that it's just not something we need to dread. That doesn't need to be the default, nor do we need to be, as we age, be talked to by brands as if we are limited in our potential and so forth. And so this is the dance, this is the tango, this is why we're all doing this together, why I'm so excited that we have a global audience tuning into this conversation and a global partner, because, you know, the products that end up on the shelves with the brand campaigns around them are the signals.
Yeah.
Right? They're the signals to the consumer, but they're the signals to the other innovators about what's going to sell and what people want. So take us up to like the poetry level, you know, like how do we go after that? Like, we want to solve for this, and which means we have to know about the issues, like we're talking about, like things do change physiologically and so forth. We got to be honest about those things.
Yeah.
We can't attach shame to those things. But like, let's get after it, right?
Yeah, I do think, you know, we talked a little bit before about, you know, how do you frame things in terms of possibility and potential, and being able to still be you, you know, still do all the things that you love and the places that you want and all of that kind of stuff. And so, you know, I do think that there is a very deliberate, and you really are, I mean, broadly, completely outside of P&G, just broadly in the marketplace, you are starting to see a really great evolution in the way that that companies are talking to consumers of a specific age. And I actually have worked over the course of my career with an agency in New York who focuses specifically on aging consumers. And one of my first meeting with them, what they did was share a reel and a bunch of print copy of different companies that were doing it wrong, right? And talking about limitations and very stereotypical ways of depicting aging consumers, and what a turnoff that is. And frankly, nobody wants to hear about problems. Everybody wants to hear about potential, whether you're talking to a Gen Zer or you're talking to a boomer, or right, like everybody wants to be about potential. And so I think there's so much to glean from that. And as I said, I'm really starting to see it change. But if you had that perspective of going back and looking over time, whether it's insurance or banking or CPG products, and the way that we historically talked to that consumer target, it wasn't very aspirational. So I think it's changing.
Right. Well, and I think too, some of the brands and some of the innovations that we're seeing too, if there are multi-generational appeal, right, then it becomes less like, oh, you get that product because you're old, right? Like, so we hosted a pitch fest a couple of weeks ago, which you could watch online, and we've had it recorded. And one of the products was Hydrate, like a glowing water bottle, that let you know when it's time to drink, right? And so this entrepreneur was saying that, yeah, indeed, like they're getting one for all the members of the family, right? So the kids, are being reminded, mom and dad are being reminded, they're reminding their grandparents, like, so there was no shame in it, and the whole family could enjoy. Now there might be different design considerations for different demographics, clearly, but like the concept is, we again just get rid of the stigma. And there's something here that's coming in too from Ani's, thank you again, about creating new habits. And I know that's something that you and I talked about. Like, here we are with some new categories that P&G is trying to create, and with new categories, people like they don't know that they need it. Or, so how do you think about that, about creating this repetition and this habit? Because a lot of these things will take weeks and weeks or months maybe before you see the differences. Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that's so interesting about disruptive innovation in this space, and so many other spaces, which are really about, the behavioral understanding. What does it require to get a consumer to adopt a habit? And so so many healthy habits fall into that camp of, how do you get people hooked on it? A big part of that goes back to those signs of progress, and how do you give give people the encouragement that they are actually making progress. And so, stay the course. And boy, we've spent an awful lot of time, on that behavioral psychology and how do you create habits, because in most of these areas, that's the key to success. And I was talking earlier about our eczema and psoriasis business that we stood up. We also had sort of a menopause business. So many of those products and things require you to use them every day for it to work. So how do you get people hooked because they can tell it's working?
Got it. Right. So we're getting close to time. So if there are any last questions, please send them our way. And Justin, if you could also share the link to agency, so folks could stay in touch with us going forward. If you're an innovator, we would love to welcome you to the community and have you be part of this collective that we're building worldwide. And also, we're going to continue this conversation. So we set the foundation last week, a couple weeks ago, with Chayton, your partner there at P&G Ventures. And next week, we're going to be at Venture Cafe Miami. With cafe conversations. So we'll have a lot more interaction with the audience, and we'd love to have you guys tune in. So as you're thinking about what ideas this conversation sparked for you, and you want to keep going, Chayton will come back to the stage next week. And this event will be recorded with Betsy, so you get to watch this over and over again and share it with your colleagues. So again, Justin, if you can put that information into the chat. So before we say goodbye, which is kind of bumming me out, this has been such a great conversation. There's a couple of things I want to make sure that we all remember, which is clearly this is a big market and it's a growing market, and we're all in this together, right? And P&G sees this as an important market, and P&G wants to be your partner in that innovation journey, right?
That is for sure. Yeah, we're really, really excited to see, what comes out of these conversations, right? We've been talking a lot about possibilities and potential, and so I'm always excited when we do these because we get, kind of a flurry of ideas that come our way, and one of the things that we spend so much time doing is thinking about, what is the potential there, and what might we bring to that idea to make it better. And so just really excited to see what people are working on and if there might be some synergy.
Beautiful. So if you're listening, you could send a note to us at helloagency@cic.com, or go right to the website, and you'll see a big banner about the global call to action for P&G. And there's links there that you can click to apply to collaborate with P&G, and you'll go through the P&G intake process. They'll ask you lots of questions, and then we'll take it from there. And I just want to leave everybody with these wonderful directives, which are important, right? Which is get to the root cause, solve for, go beyond the obvious, right? Understand the interplay of the behavioral dynamics as much as the physical dynamics. Preventative is just as interesting as after the fact. And let's solve for the triggers before things become unraveled. And by all means, let's design with joy and make sure that these products are desirable and that they really address the unmet needs in a dignified way. Right?
Absolutely. So much potential. I mean, there really is. There's a lot of room to innovate here. And I think, when you do that with the consumer at the heart, and I do, I'll end where I began, which is, the thing that's different about what we're doing is we're not solving for an institutional problem. We're solving for how you take care of yourself, or how you take care of your mom. Or your dad, right? And so, those are, that creates different design criteria, and this idea that we can help the process from unraveling, right? Let's understand it from the beginning. What are the problems, and how do we solve them in a way that enables people to stay where they want to stay and age where they want to age? So much potential.
And again, that's the message out to the innovators. We find at agencies, so many of the startup founders that we work with, come to this work from a lived experience. Either they themselves, caring for their parents or grandparents, or we've recently launched the Founders Over 55 Club. Folks
Yeah, I
who,
love that.
right? They're like, no, this is visibility for active aging right here, right? So like, we want to make our own journey better. And so I love that final exclamation point on our conversation, Betsy, which is designed from the heart. And then it looks like we've got a great partner in P&G to help take it to market. So thank you so much, Betsy, for this. And thank you to everybody. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Thank you to the Venture Cafe Global team who's bringing this conversation out around the world. We love your efforts in pivoting from in-person to online in these very turbulent, tricky times. And I think the best we can do for each other is to stay connected, stay creative, and stay compassionate in our understanding and interactions with each other. So Betsy, thank you for a beautiful conversation.
Thanks, Danielle. Talk to y'all soon.
All right, be well, everybody.
Bye-bye.
And we'll see you next week. Age fiercely, everyone. Yes. All right, be well. And if anybody's left who wants to reach out to me directly, it's duplin@cic.com.